So once an epidural is given, a lot of times birth will stall. The woman is laying down. She's not active anymore. An epidural numbs you essentially from the waist down, so obviously you're not walking around. So she's not active in her labor anymore. Labor tends to stall, and so doctors will give more Pitocin, or nurses. And then you've got even more intense contractions, but the woman can't feel them anymore. But the baby can feel them. And they're, like I said, they're very intense, they're long, they're strong, and this is compressing the baby in a way that really doesn't replicate a natural childbirth. So frequently the baby will go into distress. And then the baby goes into distress, everybody's like, oh my God, we've got to get this baby out. Next scene, you have an emergency C-section, or maybe it's not an emergency, but you have a C-section because everyone's like, okay, the baby's in some degree of stress, we have to get the baby out. The mother's like, well, of course, you know, you're not going to argue with that. You're going to go right ahead and do it. And the sort of irony of that is that, you know, the doctor's like, well, it's a good thing you were in a hospital because look what happened. Your baby was in such distress that, you know, you had to have a C-section. When if everyone sort of like looked back at the slippery slope that this labor went down, you would realize that it didn't have to end up that way, and much of what caused the distress or the failure to progress or all the different things that lead to a C-section are a result of the intervention that frequently goes on in a medical birth, in a hospital setting. So there are many midwives and doctors who are interviewed in this film, and it's really interesting to hear their take on this, particularly a lot of the doctors who say, there's actually like one scene where there's a bunch of like young doctors who are like, ask the question, have you ever seen a natural birth? And they're all like, they kind of look at each other, it's like, no, you know, I mean, they're trained in a way that is accustomed to this type of a birth and don't necessarily know any other way. Another doctor says that if you mention home and birth in the same sentence when talking to a bunch of obstetricians, they will, you know, it'll cause a riot. And then when he poses the question, have any of you ever seen a home birth? Basically none of them have. So there's this real disconnect between what can go on in a natural way and what typically goes on in a hospital setting. And then the film focuses more on showing some of these home births. Or sorry, they're not all at home. Some of them are at home. At least one of them is in the birthing center at St. Luke's, but the idea being that these are natural births. And it's such a difference. It's so amazing because there's such a closeness and an intensity in the circle surrounding the birthing mother. You know, she's typically got her partner there. She's often has a doula there, a birth coach, and the midwife is there. And the lights are low or the sun is shining. It depends, you know, what's going on around the birth. She's frequently in a birthing pool. Sometimes she's not. Sometimes she's squatting on the floor. In one birth that they show, the woman's standing up, which is so surprising because the midwife catches the baby and she says, you know, Jen, reach down and grab your baby. And she reaches down between her legs and swings the baby up to her chest. And oh my God, the look on her face, it's so amazing. It's a beautiful moment in the film. But it, you know, it really shows like this empowerment that you can visibly notice in the women, and this incredible you know, sense of accomplishment and so forth by doing this in their own way, on their own terms, in the position that they wanted to, without being tethered to an IV or a monitor or all the things that restrict you in a medical birth. And you know, I mean, some of these births were long, some of the women were in a lot of pain and so on and so forth, but there's that, you know, kind of trade-off for being able to do it your way. Then the other thing that they talk about that I thought was really fascinating was how we sort of underestimate the cocktail of hormones and chemistry that goes on in our bodies when we give birth. I mean, we know that oxytocin is released. We know that endorphins are released. There's a whole bunch of things that go on. But one of the ideas is that when a woman births naturally, like after she gives birth, it's kind of this explosion of chemistry in her body that allows her to bond successfully with the baby, allows her to breastfeed immediately. Like everything sort of like falls into place in the natural way for which it was intended. So what they were trying to say is that in a medicalized birth where that you don't have that entire rush, those things don't exist. The benefits of what's going on in the woman's body doesn't exist. So it's not so likely that she's going to have that intense bonding or going to be able to nurse efficiently and so forth. I just want to say right now, I'm sure there are plenty of people who have had wonderful birth experiences in a hospital setting and so forth. And I certainly don't, I'm not trying to negate any of that. I mean, this is somewhat theoretical in the sense that we don't know exactly what happens and what things have gone wrong. But what we do know is that the number of women who are having trouble breastfeeding after they give birth, particularly in hospital situations, is very, very high. And there has got to be some reason for that occurring. In terms of women bonding with their babies, that's really a more subtle issue. That's not something that you can measure so readily. And the bonding is, and I mentioned this in a previous show, sometimes the bonding is just about this intensity of protection, feeling this like overwhelming, like, mama bear kind of like protective feeling over your baby that evolves into something else. But it's very primal, and it's very much something that is lacking in a sterile clinical setting. So that's, I think, pretty much what the film shows. It shows a little bit of like the history of birth in this country and where things sort of went awry. We've had like people might have heard of twilight births where women were put out completely, and like woke up with no memory of their birth. Women who were given epidurals that were so strong that they inhibited their own breathing. One of the doctors was pointing out how so many things that have been tried in pregnancy, for example, were tried on pregnant women, and the results were not discovered, disastrous results, until afterwards. For example, I think it was in the 1940s that all women were x-rayed while they were pregnant so that they could see what the pelvis looked like and whether or not she'd be capable of birthing. And then, of course, we had thalidomide babies in the 60s where women were given a drug during their pregnancy during a particular stage where the arms and legs were developing. So those are babies that were born with this sort of flipper arms and legs. Just another example of medicine intervening in a way that was unnecessary and had disastrous effects. So what's going on today with many of the things that are happening is we don't actually know. I mean, we don't know what the repercussions are of these kind of births and how they affect the babies and how they affect the mothers. In this film, The Business of Birth, really most of the all of the emphasis is on the woman's experience. And doesn't really focus on so much on what the baby experiences. So there's another film that I wanted to talk about that focuses on that, and that's called What Babies Want, which is a documentary that Noah Wiley narrates. But I don't quite want to get into that yet. I just wanted to stay with The Business of Being Born for another moment. I just wanted to say that I don't actually know where this film is going in terms of distribution. I would imagine it's not going to hit the theaters. It's not really that kind of a film. So it will probably go onto DVD, and well, I'm certain it'll go onto DVD, and we'll have perhaps some extra features and so forth, which will be interesting. And I think if you email me and if I can stay on top of it, I'll let you know when it becomes available to the public, or you can just maybe Google it yourself and see what happens. But at this point, I don't think it's available to be able to be seen outside of the situation in which I saw it. But hang on one second.